Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into all this stuff you sent us about building better habits. Looks like you've been really digging into James Clear's Atomic Habits. So let's unpack some of those key takeaways, shall we?
Atomic Habits. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. Tons of great insights.
It really is. Well, I was reading about James Clear's story, the whole baseball injury thing. I was just struck by how that, such a major setback actually kind of became the catalyst for him getting so interested in habits in the first place.
It's true. I mean, it just goes to show you, right? Like even facing something so difficult, you can actually use, these small changes to rebuild and achieve incredible things. It's not like some overnight thing. Clear's whole journey really underscores that power of compounding, like how the tiny, like 1% improvements can actually add up over time to amazing results.
Speaking of compounding, you think about like even Olympic champions, right? They rely on those tiny improvements too. Take the British cycling team. They were like, I think, the laughing stock of the cycling world for a while, but then they embraced this whole concept of aggregation of marginal gains, where they were making these tiny changes to everything, like literally everything from their training, their equipment, even like their hand washing habits. Isn't
Wow.
that wild? And what's so cool is they ended up dominating the cycling world, winning like multiple Tour de France titles, Olympic gold medals, all because of these tiny twinks.
Yeah, it just shows you how these small 1% changes, you might think they're insignificant, but over time they can really make a huge difference.
It really changes how we think about success, right? It's not always about some grand gesture or overnight miracle. It's like the slow and steady, accumulation of these small, deliberate actions.
Absolutely. And that's where I think Clear's emphasis on this identity-based approach to habits, that's where it really comes in. It's not just changing what you do, it's about changing who you are, your identity.
Yeah, and there's this story, I love this story, about Brian Clark, the entrepreneur. He was a chronic nail biter. He tried all the usual things, nothing worked. But then he started getting manicures and started viewing himself as someone who takes care of their hands. And that's when the habit actually stuck. Like his actions started to align with his new self-image. So cool.
I know, I love that story. It just shows the power of how you see yourself. That can really influence what you do. It's about asking yourself, who is it that I want to become? What kind of person would embody these habits I'm trying to develop?
Yeah, it's not just I want to lose weight. It's I want to become a healthy person. Like that shift is so powerful. It's not about achieving a specific outcome. It's about aligning your habits with that desired self-image.
Exactly. And that's where, you get into Clear's four laws of behavior change. This is where the rubber meets the road, right? Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying. And all of these laws, they're grounded in neurology, psychology, all this cool science that helps explain why they actually work.
So let's break those down one by one, starting with make it obvious. What does that even mean in the context of habits?
So basically, it's about awareness. It's about designing your environment in a way that supports the behavior you want to change. Our brains are wired to conserve energy, so we tend to rely on automatic behaviors, things we do without even thinking about it. So the key is to make the thing you want to do so obvious that it becomes the default, the easy choice.
So instead of relying on willpower, we're kind of tricking our brains a little bit by setting up our environment to just make that healthy choice the easy choice.
Exactly. And Clear has a bunch of practical tips for this. Like one of them is this thing called habit stacking. Basically linking a new habit you want to an existing one. So you're kind of piggybacking on those neural pathways that are already established. So for example, after I pour my morning coffee, I'll do like 5 minutes of stretching.
Oh, I like that. I do something similar. After I brush my teeth, I write down 3 things I'm grateful for. Starts the day on a good note.
Yeah, love it.
But, you know, there's those times when willpower isn't enough, right? Like when that bag of chips is just staring you in the face. How do we deal with that?
Well, that's where the out of sight, out of mind principle comes in, right? We have to design our environment so that, those undesirable behaviors are less accessible. So you're trying to cut back on sugar, keep the sugary snacks out of sight.
You know what? I actually started doing that. I keep a big bowl of fruit on the counter and all the like healthy snacks right in the front of the pantry. And it's amazing. Like it is so much easier to resist when those unhealthy things aren't right there in your face.
I know. It's amazing how well it works, right? So you're minimizing those cues that trigger cravings and making the healthy choice the easiest option. And, there's actually science behind this. Dr. Ann Thorndike, she did this study where she rearranged a hospital cafeteria to make the healthier choices more obvious, more prominent. And guess what? People started choosing healthier foods without even realizing it.
That's so wild. It just shows how much our environment shapes our choices, even without us realizing it. It's like these little nudges that guide us towards those better behaviors.
Absolutely. It's all about consciously designing your surroundings to help you reach your goals. And, this also applies to our social environment, too. Claire talks about how the people we surround ourselves with, they can shape our habits, too.
So you're saying, like, if our friends and family are health conscious, we're more likely to be healthy too.
Exactly. We're social creatures, right? We're wired to imitate the people around us, especially the people we look up to. So finding your tribe, the people who align with the habits you want to develop, it can make a huge difference. It's like finding a community where the behavior you want is just the norm.
That makes so much sense. So it's not just willpower. It's like creating this whole ecosystem that supports the changes you want to make. Okay. So we made it obvious. Now, how do we make it attractive? This is where it gets a little tricky, right?
It is. It's where we get into the brain as reward system. That whole dopamine feedback loop that makes certain behaviors so appealing. Our brains, they release this chemical, dopamine, when we do things we enjoy. And that creates this reward loop that makes us want to do them again and again.
Okay, so how do we hack that? Like, how do we make our good habits more appealing? Because let's be honest, sometimes those healthy choices just don't stack up against a big bowl of ice cream or binge watching your favorite show.
Yeah, you got to get creative so you find ways to link those desire actions with something pleasurable. Clear calls this temptation bundling, where you take something you want to do and pair it with something you need to do.
Like that guy in the book, the engineering student who hacked his exercise bike. So Netflix would only playing when he was pedaling at a certain speed.
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant. So exercise, something he needed to do, became linked to entertainment, something he wanted. And by bundling them, he actually made exercise more appealing.
My mind is already racing with ideas. Maybe I'll only let myself listen to my favorite podcast while I'm on the treadmill. But isn't there also like a social aspect to making it attractive? We talked about our environment, but our friends and family, they play a role too, right?
Absolutely. We're social creatures, right? We imitate the people around us, especially people we admire or see as powerful. So hanging out with people who already embody those habits you want, it can make those habits way more attractive and way easier to adopt.
So like if everyone in my running club is training for a marathon, I'm more likely to push myself.
Exactly. You're tapping into that social influence to make the behavior more appealing and more attainable.
So we've made it obvious, we've made it attractive. Let's move on to law number 3, make it easy. This is where that whole start small philosophy comes in, right?
Yeah, that's it. The key here is to reduce the friction associated with good habits and increase the friction associated with bad ones. Our brains, they love the path of least resistance, and we got to make those good behaviors as effortless as possible.
So instead of aiming to go to the gym 5 days a week, I might start with just committing to 2. Or like instead of trying to cook these elaborate healthy meals every night, I might focus on just prepping some simple healthy snacks to have on hand.
Exactly. It's about making those healthy choices the easier, more convenient options. And there was this study, Clear talks about it, where they found that some homeowners were using 30% less energy than their neighbors simply because they had these visible meters that showed their energy consumption in real time. Just by seeing it, they used less.
I remember that. Amazing how even something as simple as like visual feedback can influence our behavior so much.
It's true. It makes this abstract thing like energy consumption suddenly concrete and something you can take action on. So using visual cues like that, it's a great way to promote more mindful behavior. And there's another strategy that's great for this make it easy principle. It's called the 2-minute rule.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. That's all about breaking habits down into those tiny manageable steps, right?
You got it. It's about mastering the art of showing up, even if it's just for 2 minutes. So instead of read a whole book, you start with read one page. Instead of meditate for 30 minutes, you start with sit quietly for 1 minute.
It sounds almost too simple, but I can totally see how that can make a huge difference when it comes to getting started and building that momentum.
It's all about lowering the barrier to entry and building the habit of just showing up consistently. And then from there, you build on those small wins.
All right, made it obvious, made it attractive, made it easy. Now for the final piece of the puzzle. Make it satisfying. I have a feeling this is where that brain reward system comes back into play.
You know it. This is about making those good habits immediately rewarding, even if it's in a small way.
Yeah, because delayed gratification is tough. We all want those immediate rewards. Our brains are wired that way.
Absolutely. So we need to find ways to make those healthy choices feel good in the moment. Clear uses the example of chewing gum. It wasn't until Wrigley started adding flavors like spearmint and juicy fruit that chewing gum really took
Oh,
off.
that's interesting. So it wasn't just about the act of chewing. It was about making the experience pleasurable.
Exactly. They tapped into that human desire for instant gratification. So it's not just about the long-term benefits of brushing your teeth. It's about using a toothpaste that leaves your mouth feeling fresh and tingly.
I'm starting to see how it all fits together. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about finding ways to make those healthy choices more appealing, more accessible, more enjoyable.
That's it. It's working with your brain, not against it. And this brings us to another important aspect of habit building, tracking your progress.
Okay, so how do we actually track our progress and stay motivated?
Well, that's where habit tracking comes in. It's simple, but it's so powerful for staying consistent and reinforcing those positive behaviors. Clear suggests something as basic as marking an X on a calendar each day you complete your habit.
I do that with my workouts. Big calendar on the fridge, mark it off every day I exercise. It's so satisfying to see those streaks add up. It's like Clear calls this never breaking the chain, right?
Yes, that's it. It plays on our natural desire to keep those streaks going, avoid breaking the chain. It helps us stay accountable to ourselves and avoid that one missed day won't hurt thinking.
And speaking of accountability, I remember reading about accountability partners, how important that can be.
Oh, hugely important. Having someone to share your goals with, someone to check in with, it can give you that extra motivation and support. Clear even suggests making a habit contract with your accountability partner where you outline your commitment and the penalty for not following through.
Ooh, I like that. Makes those consequences feel a lot more real.
It does. It adds a layer of external pressure that can be super effective. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from small changes and compounding to identity, environment, even the brain's reward system.
This has been so insightful, but it feels like we've only scratched the surface. I'm excited to learn more about how to really take these principles to the next level.
Well, there's a lot more to explore. In part two, we'll dig deeper into the nuances of habit formation, the role of genetics, deliberate practice, and the importance of systems and reflection for long-term success.
I can't wait. See you back here soon for part 2 of our deep dive into atomic habits.
See you then.
Welcome back to our deep dive into atomic habits. So we've talked about those small changes, done consistently, leading to big results. And we explored those 4 laws that make those changes stick. But now I'm kind of curious about our natural talents and predispositions. Do those play a role? Like, what about nature versus nurture?
That's a great question. Clear tackles that in the book, and it's fascinating. He uses these two incredible athletes as examples, Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer, and Hicham El Guerrouj, the record-breaking runner.
Right. Both amazing athletes, but built totally differently, right? Like Phelps is practically built for swimming, that long torso, crazy arm span. And then El Guerrouj, he's much more slender, perfect for those long distances.
Exactly. Clear even points out that they have the same inseam length, even though there's a significant height difference. So it really makes you think, are we just slaves to our genes?
That's what I was thinking. It's kind of disheartening if you think about it. Like, what's the point of trying if everything's predetermined?
It's not that simple. Clear argues that our genes don't determine our destiny, but they do influence our areas of natural talent. It's like we all have these predispositions, areas where we might have an advantage.
So instead of comparing ourselves to Michael Phelps, it's about figuring out where our strengths lie and focusing our efforts there.
Yes, work with your nature, not against it. Choose habits that align with your natural abilities. If you're naturally social, maybe focus on habits around networking or public speaking. That might be more successful than forcing yourself to become a solitary writer, for example.
Makes sense. It's about playing a game where the odds are in your favor. It makes me think about how I've always been drawn to creative stuff. Maybe that's why I struggle with those super structured analytical tasks.
Sounds like you've intuitively recognized those areas where you have a natural inclination. And that's where the idea of deliberate practice comes in. Clear says, even in areas where we might not have a natural advantage, consistent effort and focused practice can lead to big improvement.
So even if we're not naturally gifted in a particular area, we can still develop those skills. I like that. I definitely have areas where I have to work a lot harder than others.
But it's not just mindlessly repeating the same actions. It's about pushing yourself just beyond your comfort zone, continuously refining your approach. Clear calls this the Goldilocks rule, finding that sweet spot where tasks are challenging but achievable.
The Goldilocks rule. Love it. It reminds me of those times when I'm completely absorbed in a task, like I'm in the zone and time just disappears.
Exactly. Those are flow states. Clear says cultivating those flow states where we're fully immersed in challenge, that's crucial for staying motivated and achieving mastery.
Okay, so we've talked about working with our natural talents and embracing deliberate practice, but even with the most perfect habits and those flow state moments, there will be times when motivation dips, right? Life happens, things get busy, we hit plateaus. Then what?
That's where building systems and incorporating reflection becomes super important. Clear says move beyond just setting goals. Create systems that support the behaviors you want.
So, like, it's the difference between aiming to lose 10 pounds and actually establishing a system of cooking healthy meals and exercising regularly.
Exactly. The system drives sustainable change, and a key element of that system is reflection, taking time to analyze your progress, see what's working, what's not, and course correct as you go.
I've been trying to be more intentional about reflecting on my progress. I started journaling at the end of each week just to capture my thoughts and see where I can tweak things. It's interesting. Clear does an annual review where he assesses his habits, his progress, even checking if those actions align with his values. And then he also does this mid-year integrity report, which I thought was interesting.
It's like taking inventory, making sure everything's in order. And it's not just for individuals. Even top performers like Eliud Kipchoge, the Olympic marathoner, he incorporates reflection, takes detailed notes after every practice, looking for ways to improve. It's a reminder that even at the highest levels, there's always room to grow.
I love that. It ties back to that identity-based approach we talked about. It's not about checking boxes. It's about making sure your actions align with who you want to be.
Exactly. Making sure your habits are serving you, not just practically, but on a deeper level.
This has been so insightful. We've covered genetics, building systems, reflecting on progress, but I have a feeling there's even more to uncover when it comes to the power of habits.
There is. We haven't even touched on the potential downsides of those good habits or strategies for maintaining momentum over the long term.
Well, that's our cue to dive back in for part 3. See you there. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into atomic habits. We've covered so much. The power of small changes, aligning those with our identity, the systems, the reflection. But I'm thinking, what about the downsides of good habits? Is that even a thing?
That might seem kind of weird, but yeah. Claire actually brings that up in the book. He says habits are amazing, automating behaviors, freeing up mental space, but sometimes they can put us on autopilot. Literally, like we get so efficient at something that we stop paying attention to the details or even like questioning if our approach is still working.
So it's like we're just going through the motions without thinking about what we're doing or why.
Exactly. Think about something like tying your shoes. You just do it, right? Without thinking. You might not even notice if there's a better way. Or, you stick to a workout routine even though it's not helping you reach your goals anymore.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like we get so comfortable with our routines that we might miss opportunities to improve or realize that those habits aren't serving us anymore. So how do we balance like the frequency of habits with that conscious awareness? Knowing when to adjust things.
That's where Clear talks about balancing those automatic habits with what he calls deliberate practice. It's about recognizing when a habit has become stale or it's not effective anymore and being willing to change course. Like that saying, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. Sometimes you got to shake things up, even with good habits.
Totally. I've definitely been there. Sticking with something just because it was familiar, even when it wasn't working. Like I was afraid to change the routine, even though it wasn't helping me. So how do we know when it's time to tweak a habit? What are some signs?
Well, Clear has a few things to watch out for. First, notice if you're seeing a decline in performance, even if it's small. And then ask yourself if you're feeling bored or disengaged. And I think most importantly, is the habit still aligning with your goals and values?
So say I'm hitting a plateau with my weight loss, or I'm like dreading my daily meditation, or my social media habit is taking over my life. Those are all signs that it might be time to step back and rethink things.
Exactly. Just be honest with yourself. See if a habit needs a little adjustment, or maybe it's just run its course.
Okay, that makes sense. But even if we're aware and willing to adjust, we're going to slip up sometimes, right? We're human. So how do we bounce back and keep that consistency over the long term?
Yeah, I mean, nobody's perfect, right? And that's where those resilient systems that Clear talked about, that's where they come in. Having a plan for when things go wrong, because, it's bound to happen at some point.
It's like having a backup generator, for when the power goes out. You need a system that can handle those disruptions and keep you on track.
That's a great way to put it. And he has this rule. It's so simple. Never miss twice. So you mess up one day, don't sweat it. Just get back on track the next day.
Like damage control. Don't let those little slip-ups derail everything. But sometimes even getting back on track can be tough, especially if you've fallen out of the routine. Any tips for overcoming that initial inertia?
Even small actions can make a difference. Clear says even just putting on your workout clothes, even if you don't feel like exercising, or just opening your notebook if you don't feel like writing.
Oh, I love that. It's like just take that first step, no matter how small, and then the motivation often follows the action.
Right. And don't think of those setbacks as failures. Think of them as opportunities to learn and refine your approach.
Wow. This whole deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from the power of those small changes to the importance of identity, environment, systems, even those downsides of good habits. I feel like I have a whole new toolbox for building better habits.
That's fantastic. Clear's work really gives us a framework for understanding and changing our behavior. It's pretty empowering.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with one last thought, something to think about as you continue on your habit-building journey. Clear says what is immediately rewarded is repeated. So how can you make those habits you want more immediately satisfying, even in a small way?
That's a great question to reflect on. Finding those little bits of positive reinforcement can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress. Start small, be consistent, and keep refining your approach. We're all works in progress, and this whole self-improvement thing, it's a lifelong journey.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into atomic habits. We can't wait to explore another one of your requests with you soon. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep building those atomic habits.
We'll see you next time.